Are you curious about the greatest con artists in the world of wine? What creative but illegal ingredients have been added wine to cut costs or improve profits? And how can you avoid buying a fraudulent bottle? Well, tonight you're going to get those stories and more tips from our guest, whom I'll introduce momentarily. But if you're watching this video on the replay, please get in the comments. Let me know. Type the word replay. Where are you logging in from? What's in your glass? And of course, if you're here for the live stream, I want to hear from you. I'm Natalie McLean, and you've just joined one of the most passionate groups of wine lovers who gather every Wednesday at 7 p.m. to talk to the most interesting people in the world of wine, like our guest. Now, this video is based on a recording I made for my podcast, Unreserved Wine Talk, but it is being live streamed for the first time on both Facebook and YouTube Live. And so I'll be here in the comments with you live. So get in there. Let me know what tips or stories are you enjoying. Do you have any other questions? I want to hear from you. All right, and just before I introduce my guest, just let me say that 3 of you are going to win a personally signed copy of her terrific new book, Vintage Crime, A Short History of Wine Fraud. All you have to do is email me at natalie@nataliemclean.com and tell me you want to win a copy. I'll choose 3 people randomly from those who contact me. All right, back to our guest. In addition to her new book, Rebecca Gibb is the editor for the online publication Venus, covering the wines of New Zealand and the Loire Valley. In addition, she owns the wine and spirit jigsaw business. That's an unusual pairing that we'll have to ask her about, called Puzzle Crew. Rebecca is one of only 416 Masters of Wine in the world and was awarded the Outstanding Achievement Award and the Bollinger Medal in recognition of her superb tasting abilities. She lived in New Zealand for 6 years, but has since returned to the north of England, recently moving into the beautiful Lake District of the UK. That's where she joins us now from her home. Welcome, Rebecca. We're so glad to have you here.
I'm so glad to be here, especially when you tell me that you only have the most interesting people in the world. I'll take that as a
yes.
very, very much some praise.
Yes, absolutely. You walk among them. You are one of them, Rebecca.
I'll take that.
And the Lake District. Oh, I love the Lake District. I studied the Romantic poets at Oxford, and we went up there to Grasmere for a conference in the summer. So you live in such a beautiful part of the world. Oh my goodness.
Yeah, it's Wordsworth country, and I really like being in the outdoors. When I'm not thinking, talking, tasting wine, I like to be on the outdoors. So it's perfect for me.
Do you ever see 10,000 daffodils at a glance? Tossing their heads in sprightly dance? No, anyway.
Not yet, but maybe bring next spring.
Next spring. Okay, good. Be on the watch for those. Okay.
Thanks.
All right. I get distracted easily. Before we dive into your wine career, tell us about representing Great Britain in the 100-meter hurdle event. So where were you and how old were you?
Well, yes, this was some time ago. Had 20 something plus years. I was a hurdler back in the day. I was British champion. Gosh, when I was 18, 19.
Wow.
Yeah, I discovered I was quite good at hurdling when I was at school, and then decided to go down to the local track and started training, and one thing led to another, and I took it all the way and ended up representing Great Britain. And just the day after my A-levels, so A-levels is sort of the equivalent of high school graduation, I was off to Germany to represent Great Britain. Sadly, I got really badly injured about a year later, and have never gotten back to it. But I'm still really sporty, and I still enjoy fitness. But I shan't be taking up hurdles again anytime soon.
Well, it's a good balance, that kind of healthy lifestyle as you are in the wine and food business. Now, you're a woman of many passions and interests. You also play the cello. So how did you get involved in that?
Yeah, my cello's sitting about 6 foot from me here. Just at school, we took some classes, and whoever seemed moderately musical got given an instrument, and my mother said that there was no way that I was going to play the violin because it sounded like a cat squalling when you were learning. So I got given a cello, which in retrospect wasn't the greatest idea because it's very difficult to transport. I mean, it's not as big as a double bass, but you do need a fairly sizable car to transport a cello. And my sister also played the tuba. So my parents had to buy a big car.
Wow. All the extra car seats there for the instruments alone. My goodness.
Yeah, you betcha.
And now, to round this out, you love penguins. Why?
Who doesn't love a penguin?
Okay.
I think
They're
I
cute.
love there's many reasons for cute. They are cute. I love the way they waddle. And yet they are such great swimmers, so elegant in the water. And one of the things I really love about a penguin is that the male has to protect the egg while the one when the woman goes off for a swim, which seems to me a really great idea.
Oh, I love that. They're so advanced, enlightened.
Yes.
Are they
Let's do the hard work.
Yeah, absolutely. Are they birds, technically? Or are they mammals?
No, I do watch David Attenborough, but I really should know this. Well, they lay an egg.
Okay.
Yeah. I don't know. Someone in the comments section can enlighten us on that one.
Exactly. Someone definitely will. And you're not here because you're a penguin expert, so let me keep the focus here. But I was touched in your book, as we start to slide toward that, you decided to donate a portion of the book royalties to finding a cure for, is it Duchenne muscular dystrophy?
Yeah, Duchenne muscular dystrophy. Yeah, it's actually personally affected me. So
I'm sorry.
It happens. So when I submitted my manuscript for the book, final manuscript, sometimes June, July last year, it all sort of melds into one now. My son started having some tests because he wasn't keeping up with his peers. He had these really enlarged calf muscles, and so we thought maybe he just had a really tight Achilles, but it turned out he has actually Duchenne muscular dystrophy, and which has been life-changing because it's a life-shortening disease, and it's a muscle wasting condition that affects young boys, and it's incurable currently.
Wow.
But we've been really touched by the Duchenne community here in the UK, and they've really supported us in understanding the disease better and trying to come to terms with that. And so that's taken over our lives really. So while I was in the editing process and sort of sorting all out the book covers and doing all this, this was really in the throes of just coming to terms with that. So I want to make things better. So yeah, I've decided that I wanted to put a portion of my royalties, 10% of my royalties, to finding a cure or better treatments for Duchenne muscular dystrophy. And I've also set up a bit of a plug here, set up a Just Giving page, justgiving.com, Mac My Day. My son's called Macaulay, and we are just going to be raising funds over the next few years, just try and help other kids as well, because it isn't just us that's affected by it.
That is so admirable, and we'll put a link to that in the show notes and in the comments on the live stream for sure.
Thank you.
Absolutely. Oh, no. Kudos to you. All right, let's get into the book, Vintage Crime. What drew you to this story in the first place?
So, as some of you may know or may not know, I'm a Master of Wine. So I became a Master of Wine in 2015, and I passed my theory and my tasting exams back in 2011 and 2012, and then I was searching for a research paper topic, and I have a degree in history and politics, or whatever you call it in the US, I majored in, and I just love history, and I thought, well, do you know what, that's my specialist subject. Been a journalist for 15, 20 years. I'm a researcher, it just naturally suits me. It's what I'm interested in. I'm going to have to study this for the next, 6 to 12 months. It's basically like doing a master's thesis at uni.
Right.
So I started looking around for a topic, and I stumbled across a couple of stories in a book that it was scantily covered about riots in Champagne. I thought, this sounds quite interesting. A juicy story, and I thought that's something I could get into. I speak French, I love to research, so I just started scratching the surface and realising there was so little about it in the English language, and most of the histories and most of the information in French was narrative history. It didn't really get to grips with why it happened, so I took it on, and I found out that one of the major reasons why the riots happened in Champagne in 1911 was because there was an awful lot of fraud going on, and people who were really growing the grapes and trying to make an honest living out of it were really struggling because they were basically being undercut by people who were making champagne that wasn't made from fruit that was grown in the region.
Wow. Wow, that's incredible. And we're going to dive into the champagne story in a bit, but that's great. And so why do you think, like, that intrigued you at first, this champagne story? You wanted to find out why it was happening and more about it. But why do you think generally we love or are drawn to tales of crime and greed and fraud? What is it about human nature that is fascinated with these stories?
Look, I love wine. I'm a proper wine nerd, but I really love people too, and I love stories of people. Mm-hmm. And I love stories of people who are less than scrupulous. It's incredible how I have a moral compass, but it seems that a lot of people's moral compasses are slightly askew. There's a fearlessness to it. There's some sort of guile, but there's also a wondering whether you could perhaps secretly you wonder, could I do it and get away with it too? I just think there's all that. I mean, we're fascinated by fraud. There's been so many Netflix series. There's been movies like Catch Me If You Can. People love a story about people trying to get one over on others.
Yeah, that's true.
And yeah, it's endlessly compelling.
And the number one wine podcast, I'm doing air quotes there, is called Wine Crime. But it's all about two hosts discussing crime and murder mysteries as they drink wine. It's nothing to do with wine, but it's the number one wine podcast. So there you go. We are fascinated. Yes. And there's an acronym or something that you have talked about, MICE. What does that stand for?
MICE. Yes, that's commonly used to give a reason why people commit fraud. It's used by academics and such like, but there's lots of different fraud reasons. There's often different descriptors about why people commit fraud, but yeah, MICE is a nice acronym that people can get their teeth into. So MICE, money. People commit money. People commit fraud because maybe they don't have enough money, or maybe they want more. That's
right.
And then I think ideology. They really truly believe. They truly believe that they are doing something that they can do, or they can maybe get one over on others. And also they really enjoy doing it, and they justify it to themselves. I'm doing this, but others do it too, or they justify their own crime, and that's sort of where the I in MICE comes from.
Oh, the system's unfair, so I'm going to get mine, whatever.
Yeah,
I'm sure.
I know.
Lots of justifications.
Totally. We all feel hard done by a lot of the time. So if they're doing why can't I sort of thing.
Sure.
C, coercion. Now, in some of the stories that I talk about in my book, it seems that there are people who end up as party to the crime. Mm-hmm. They don't want to be a part of it, but they're just sort of dragged along with it, or they're not the main actor, but they do become part of the crime, and that's sort of the coercion thing, that people are becoming involved. And then ego.
Sure.
You can commit if you can show off to a wine critic or a wine expert at a major auction house that you've got a bottle of a chem, and it isn't really a chem, and they believe it to be true. That can give your ego a boost, that you could actually get one over on another, and it propels you into perpetuating that crime, so you keep on doing it. It's sort of that ego boost, that sort of little, when you do exercise, you get the endorphin buzz, and for and for wine criminals, that seems to be the same.
Yeah, put one over on the critic, even they couldn't. And I would think ego plays a part too in some of the people who support these con artists, because they don't want to admit they were duped, or they like flying in these high circles, because when it comes to wine, the fraud is all at the top, the very expensive bottles. So I imagine there are some co-enablers involved in this whole thing in terms of why it works.
Absolutely, and that's one of the many reasons why wine fraud has been able to be committed in the past sort of 20 or 30 years, because there is that ego involved. People don't want to admit they have been duped, particularly if wine fraud today is really occurring top echelons now, and they tend to be male, rich. They don't want to be seen to be wrong.
Sure.
There are a few people, which we talk about, like Bill Koch, he's publicly gone on record and saying he was wrong, but it takes a lot to come out and say, I have been duped, because it makes you look a little stupid.
Yeah, yeah, spending thousands or hundreds of thousands of dollars on fake goods, I'm sure. And why are you personally drawn to this dark side of wine? Have you done any therapy on that, Rebecca?
I just, as I said before, I just find it really compelling, and I love I mean, I don't come from a natural wine background. My parents drank Liebfraumilch Milch when I was growing up. I don't come from that background, so to come into the wine, and I didn't go to private school. I just came from quite a humble background, and I don't come from I come from a working class background in the northeast of England, which is more steel and coal mining. So I don't come from a natural background, and I think that I've always kind of been a little bit left of field, left of centre, and I just find that what I really love reading about when it comes to wine, I don't love reading about rootstocks, and I don't love reading about how many hectares of Petit Verdot are planted, and I'm probably going to upset a lot of people here, but I don't really care whether it's sandy soil or it's silt. Oh, I do sometimes, but
I'm kidding. This crowd doesn't either.
Oh,
it's all about the
good.
stories. That's why you're
Hooray.
here. It's the
Thank
stories about
God.
people.
But people really I really connect with people. I love.
Yes.
And you know what? I've read so many boring wine books in my time that are perfect for the insomniac, and I was like, I want to write a wine book that people are actually put down and go, you know what? I really enjoyed that book because that is such a rarity, and I really want to. That's my aim when I'm writing, is to write a piece that people get to the end. It doesn't have to be educational. I just want people to get to the end and have enjoyed it.
Right. Absolutely, and your book certainly does that. I finished it recently, and it does read like a detective story, and yet it's all the more powerful because you realize this happened in real life. So these are real people, which gives it that extra edge. So,
Excellent.
yeah, absolutely, well done.
Great, thank you. I think it's also really important. I also want people who are not just wine people to read it.
Yes.
I hope that it extends to a wider audience who just like a
definitely.
bit of history.
Absolutely.
I think
Anybody
it's
who's
really
interested in people, basically, or human nature. Because I think, although, it's great to have happy stories and so on, but nothing is more fascinating than the dark side of human nature. It brings out so many contrasts, the extremes of humanity, if you will.
Yes.
So you've done a great job in capturing that.
Absolutely.
You do not have to be an expert or a wine
No.
person, to read it.
I think also it's really important. Like I love wine and I love history, and I've always wanted to bring the two together. So to have this opportunity to do it is a dream come true. You know what? I may as well retire. Well, if I had enough money, I'd retire now. Hopefully, this will be a New York seller.
Well, maybe you've learned all the techniques. You know what to do. Rebecca, just get some fake Petrus labels or whatever. Kidding, just kidding.
Yes.
Yeah. Okay, so you chronicle the history of wine fraud that goes back to the ancient times of Rome. What was the most popular method of deception back then?
Oh, popular method. There were lots of popular methods of deception, but it's tricky in the Roman times. I mean, it's really tricky because a lot of people love to, watering down was quite a common crime in bars. So they'd buy their wine and maybe they'd buy their wine, but then if a bar owner might then water it down more than he or she probably ought to have done.
Sure.
And yet it was considered underhand behaviour, and yet it was common practice for Romans to water down their wine in the home. So I found the Roman period quite a tricky one in terms of trying to discover what was considered normal practices or amelioration versus what was adulteration, because often the two were very similar. So people might add water, and that considered amelioration. I think it's all to do with where the intent lies.
Yes.
Was there an intent to deceive?
Yeah.
People would add seawater, herbs, fenugreek. They would add honey to their wine quite commonly.
Okay.
To make the wine taste better, because let's face it, in this time, we didn't have stainless steel tanks. We weren't using SO2 to protect the wine from oxidation. those techniques weren't around, so your wine soured quite quickly. So people were using these basically to mask the flavour of what was essentially sour wine.
Sure, absolutely.
Some people would do it intently in their homes. They might carry even like a sachet around with them to add to wine if they were on the road, on taverns. You know, if you were going if you were going along on a modern car journey, you would take your own additions to make your wine taste more to your palate.
Right.
That was amelioration. It's making the wine taste better for you. But if it was done in a back office or something, it was, there's a fine line between what's adulteration and what isn't.
Sure.
Tricky.
Transparency, I guess. Now, you mentioned that I'm going to jump forward on the timeline because people have to get the book to get all the juicy details in between here. But you mentioned that Beethoven went deaf, perhaps due to, was it lead poisoning or lead doctoring in the wine?
Possibly. Beethoven loved to drink.
Huh.
So most of us will know that Beethoven became deaf during his lifetime. But many of us won't know that he suffered from really bad cramps. He was really grouchy. I mean, you'd probably be grouchy if you couldn't hear and you were a composer. But yeah, he was really, it was irritable, had like rheumatism. His health was really deteriorating. And there have been quite a lot of studies which have shown that actually it could have been one of the causes of his deafness and his other medical ailments was lead poisoning, because at that time people were adding lead salts, or they were adding a thing called sapper or defrutum, which was basically reduced wine. It was sweet wine, but it would be boiled down in a lead-lined vessel. Therefore, it would pick up lots of lead in it, and that gave it like almost a sweet taste. And at this time, wines could sour quite easily, so that sweet taste would make a sour wine taste quite lovely. So he would drink wines from Hungary, he would drink wines from Germany, but it was quite likely he had quite a taste for port, and at that time, sort of late 1700s, early 1800s, like there's quite a lot of lead in it, and it's definitely a reason why he could have been poisoned with lead. And there's a whole big story about this around his hair and his skull fragments, and just you have to read more in the Dying for a Drink chapter in my book. I'm not going to give it all away.
Oh yeah, no, nice teaser. Okay, so then in the 1800s, when the late 1800s, I should say, when the vine root phylloxera killed off about 2 million hectares of vines, what odd methods did vintners try to do before they restored them? Now this wasn't about fraud. I just found it amusing what they were doing to try to restore the vines. What did they do?
It's cracking, isn't it? Yeah. So people, it leads on to, like, I basically, just to contextualize this, I try to explain why fraud occurred. So it's like my book is it's like a history of wine told through fraud. So one of the reasons that fraud occurred later on is because of the phylloxera and the lack of wine. So there was this huge lack of wine. So phylloxera hits French shores in the 1860s, and it takes its time to get going, and they don't know what's causing this. And we now know that if you graft an American rootstock to Vitis vinifera, you have resistance to phylloxera. That's common knowledge. Not so common knowledge in the 1870s when it was really taking hold. So the French government gives out a reward for trying to find give some like a medication, a solution for phylloxera.
Sure.
So people start suggesting things. So burying toads in the vineyard, that was suggested, ineffective.
Poor toads.
Spreading volcanic dust, that was also ineffective. My favourite of all is having a marching band play in your vineyard. I mean, that is definitely the best one.
And it might be the closest to what some vintners do today. They have music playing in it's more the barrel aging cellar rooms or whatever, but I could just see a marching band going down the rows, the vineyard rows. It's like,
I would love, yeah. Unfortunately, they couldn't record it then on their iPhones, so it's a shame, isn't it? But yeah, by sort of the late 1880s, they did come to the fact that actually they had to put it on American rootstocks, but that wasn't that well received, and it did take 20 or 30 years before it was really truly embedded.
Huh. Wow. Yeah, that would have been devastating, because as we know, it takes 5 to 7 years for a vine to come to maturity. So new plantings, even on rootstock, were going to take a while before they produce the fruit that could create the wine. So there would be quite a gap in wine production. Now, during World War I, jumping ahead again, you note that 40% of vineyards, I think, in Champagne were destroyed, and yet there was more champagne sold than produced for a period of time. Something like 1 in 2 bottles were fake. Talk more about that.
So, where do we start? Phylloxera may have taken hold in France, sort of in parts of France, in the south of France, in the Languedoc, for example, in the 1860s. But it didn't really hit Champagne. First recordings of phylloxera in Champagne happened in 1892. So it was actually quite slow to take hold. So it's actually the early noughties and the 10s of the 1900s where it's actually starting to take hold. Now, so people are having to replant at this time. They're having bad harvests. So there's not a lot of fruit going around, and yet champagne sales are, champagne's becoming really popular at this time. This is, you see lots of posters, some people's walls now, postcards from the Champagne period. This is time that champagne marketing's really getting going. People couldn't get enough of champagne, and there wasn't enough to go around. So what do? You truck in wine from the Languedoc, or you truck in wine from the Loire, and it arrives into the station in Epinay, for example, as a Loire wine. It goes into your cellar, comes out as a sparkling wine that has a champagne label on it.
Magic.
Yeah, it is magic, isn't it? And at this time, the laws are still sort of starting to come together on this. Obviously, this is not good news to the people who have just recently replanted and spent all their life savings, if they had any, on replanting their vineyards or taking out huge bank loans, and then they've got what grapes they have are the grape prices are being depressed. So people are pretty peeved about this. So, they head out into the streets, shout down with fraud. They also are asking for, they're asking for bread. Simply, they can't feed their families because they're not making ends meet.
And thus the Champagne riots. And it got so bad that they were jailing children as young as 12 for stealing wine. Like they were clamping down on everything fraudulent.
Well, the French army is stationed in Epinay and in around that area, so around that area of Champagne, to keep the peace. And they clamp down, basically. They clamp down on stealing. The riots happen, wine goes down the street, champagne houses go up in flames. There's looting. There's general looting. I think I have to verify this, but I think that some child gets jailed for like stealing one single bottle of wine and some matches. It's
Wow.
A lot of people are they're let go, but they're arrested, but they don't get sentenced.
And but it did get. Is this when Roederer, who produces that coveted cult champagne Cristal that the rappers have shouted out and so on, is this when they hire a full-time fraud detective?
I actually don't know. I saw that in your questions earlier, and I was like,
okay.
Do you know what? I'm going to have to find out, because that is something I have not heard about. But yeah,
okay,
that's really interesting.
Well, they had a serious investment in detecting fraud for sure. I just imagine a gumshoe detective, but in his office desk is a Cristal bottle, not the old whiskey. Anyway, that's just my runaway imagination. But there's some very creative ingredients that have been added to wine. You talk about rehydrating raisins and trucking up cheap wine, of course, at night. But how did blueberries from Norway get into, was it Burgundy?
Yeah. How did they get? Yes. Well, I mean, we love to see like mise en bouteille à la propriété these days in French wine, for example. You know, the wine has been bottled at the property. But
Yeah.
wine didn't used to be bottled at the property. That's like Burgundy. That's like the embryon. The starts of that's like 1930s and 40s, where people start like the first people start really bottling at the property. Wine would be sent in barrels, large barrels, to a port, or it would be sent to a merchant, and you know it could end up in anything. And yeah, often, and you know what, Norwegian blueberries are really deeply coloured, as any blueberries are really. So
Sure.
yeah, so you know if your wine is lacking in colour and your customer wants a wine that's deep in colour, yeah, throw a few
Give them what they
blueberries
want.
in, steep them in that. There you go.
And I just have to ask, this is just, I don't know if this is even in chronological order, but there was a label created called Cat on an Egg, but it was the French version. What was that?
So there's a whole chapter dedicated to how the appellations come about in 1936, and the leading appellation for that occurring is Châteauneuf du Pape, and they were really stringent even before the appellation system was created. It was you can read about this in the book, but you know, fighter pilot, war hero, turned lawyer, becomes the protector of Châteauneuf du Pape, and they had these really stringent laws in place even before 1936, and once 1936 they were one of the first appellations to become an appellation, I think, for want of a better word. But yet then you see the critter labels comes along in the 90s. You see like Goats du Robe. You remember like
Robe, yeah. Fairview wines
Kangaroo.
from South Africa had goats to robe. They still do, actually.
I think they do still.
Surprised that they still have it.
So critter labels come about. You see kangaroos on Australian wines, that sort of thing. And what in that sort of period, along comes a chat on earth. So cat on an egg.
Châteauneuf, yeah. Oh my goodness.
Yes. So you can imagine the people of Châteauneuf, who have such a strong history in protecting their village. They weren't best pleased about that. So that they were given a cease and desist letter.
And did they comply? Did they take it off the market?
Well, Chateau
you know.
Earth, the Chateau Earth brand name sort of was given the heave ho, but the brand that replaced it, there's still a cat on an egg.
Defiant.
Yeah, get yourself to Britain, can you have a cat on an egg? Perfect.
That's great.
Perfect when paired with cat food.
Oh, yeah. Something's got to perk that up. But you have a story, like wine fraud has become so mainstream. The Simpsons, of course, which picks up on a lot of leading cultural trends before they're actual trends. What was the story on the Simpsons episode about wine fraud?
The Simpsons, yes.
Yes.
What, you don't expect to read about that in a wine book, do you? No. This is the very nature of my book. So it's the first series of The Simpsons. This is in like 1990. I'm still at primary school then, so I do not obviously realise the cultural significance of this yet.
Wow.
There's an episode called The Grapes of Wrath, and I always only became aware of this episode when I went for my coffee at my local coffee shop, and who's like I know the guy now who works there and who owns it, and I talking to him about my book that I'm writing, and he's like, antifreeze, this Asturian wine scandal. It's like, do you know about the Simpsons episode? And I'm like, no. So I go watch it. Anyway, so Grapes of Wrath, Bart gets sent off to France on a French exchange as a punishment for basically blowing up a toilet when Principal Skinner's mother is sitting on it. Anyway, bad timing. So he goes off to do a French exchange, but he doesn't get put with a lovely family. I didn't get put with a lovely family in my French exchange either. Anyway, I digress. And he ends up with these two winemakers who are unscrupulous, the owners of Chateau Maison, and they're adding antifreeze to their wine anyway. They make Bart drink it, and he really doesn't want to do it because he's seen that they've put antifreeze in it. It doesn't poison him, so they're like, oh, we can do this, so let's carry on. The long and short is that Bart tells a police officer what's going on. He tells them that Bart's being mistreated. He tells them he's being mistreated. He has to sleep in the donkey stable, and then he tells her that adding antifreeze to wine. And then the police officer's like, antifreeze to wine, this is a scandal. They
He
get
picks
arrested.
up on that.
He goes back to the US a hero.
Oh, wow. Okay. Great segue to the Austrian wine scandal, which, again, we'll summarize. You have to get the juicy details in the book. But in 1985, a certain small group, I think, of vintners were adding an ingredient. I don't know if it was an ingredient of antifreeze or it was confused with antifreeze or both. It certainly wasn't lethal except in extreme amounts. But tell us what they were adding and why they were doing it.
So, you need context of what's happening in Austria at that time. People have been planting a lot of vines because, they've been told that there's going to be this huge market for Austrian wine. Doesn't materialise. And so they've got these big yields, lots of grapes, not making very nice wine. And there's a taste at this time for sweet wine. And they've been told there's been a law being changed that they're not allowed to, add glucose. Anyway, a sweetening agent anymore. And somebody who's feeling inventive discovers that they can use a thing called diethylene glycol, which is an antifreeze. Antifreeze is actually ethylene glycol. But
Okay.
somebody in the media department who wants to make a sensation, somebody in the news department of some magazine or newspaper or television station,
Media.
gets the I know, media, and it's journalists. Get the compound confused, and suddenly it becomes the antifreeze scandal, which it isn't. They're adding basically this diethylene glycol. It plumps out on wine. It's kind of like what sugar does to a wine. It plumps it out. It makes it richer, just a lot more lovely and easy to drink. If you go in Germany or Austria, you can have some real high acids in your wine. It can just smooth any creases out.
Wow. But it wasn't lethal. Did it have any sort of deleterious effect, or it was just an illegal ingredient? Like that was the main problem with it?
Well, it wasn't. It was in large quantities, not good for your health.
Okay.
But in small quantities, it wasn't going to kill you in small quantities. In very large, you'd have to drink an awful lot of wine, and pretty alcohol poisoning would get you before the diethylene glycol would get you. But,
Okay.
the story breaks, and, media gets hold of it, and people don't really know what the effects are, so it becomes a big scandal, and there's a lot of concern, there's a lot of misinformation, but as a result, the Austrian wine scene is just devastated by it.
Huh. Yeah, you say exports dropped 90% and didn't recover for 16 years, which is incredible. What a damage to their reputation.
It is a huge damage to the reputation. You also have to look at taking that with a pinch of salt as well. Exports have never been massive for
Okay.
Austria. Austrian wine has been traditionally drunk by Austrians before it happened, but for exports were really, to begin with, were like Germany and Switzerland. So
Okay.
often German-speaking places. But in the last, I think you'll probably agree that what you've seen in the last 15, 20 years, what comes out of Austria now is worthy of more often than not, is worthy of Michelin star restaurants. And there's a lot of very fine wine coming out of Austria now.
It's fantastic.
They've really turned it around.
The quality is amazing. So did they do anything else, the Austrians, apart from fixing the issue and improving their quality and perhaps implementing new laws? Was there anything else they did to recover their reputation?
Well, I think the new laws were they became very stringent.
Okay.
People went to prison.
That'll do it.
A lot of people went out of business in the late 1980s because of the scandal. Just sales just absolutely went up. I think it's taken a really long time for Austria to come back. But stringent wine laws have really sort of pulled it up by its britches.
Yes, absolutely. Well, the flagship white wine, Gruner Veltliner, and even the light reds are superb food wines. I mean, I recommend them all the time, and they they have what's working against them is I don't think so much the memory is faded, at least for new consumers, of that scandal, but it's just hard to pronounce these names, don't know where they come from. Like, they still have a lot of marketing they have to do, I think, and consumer awareness, but they are doing it for sure.
Yeah, I think so too. I think Gruner Veltliner and Riesling are great. I love the purity of them. They're dry styles, and at least
Yes.
at least they put the great variety on the label.
True. Yeah,
which
that's
is helpful. And they
Yes.
don't have the crazy predicats level. You don't have to start looking at Cabinet and Spätlese and Trockenbeerenauslese, and
Right.
you're just left scratching your head.
All the German classifications. Okay, so let's keep going in our little speedboat here. One of the most famous counterfeit wines involved a bottle of Thomas Jefferson's cellar. Now, this wasn't during that time, but it was much later. I don't know if it's the 90s or when it happened, but it subsequently resulted in a book called The Billionaire's Vinegar, which might be made into a movie. But how did this fraudster get away with this? He was passing off a bottle, very expensive bottles, as belonging to the former U.S. president.
How did Hardy Rodenstock get away with, pulling the wool over people's eyes?
Yeah.
Well, I think we can look at Hardy Rodenstock's, his real name was Meinhard Gurke, and he was like a minor pop band, folksy German band manager, but he loved wine, and he became part of the German fine wine scene. He was a real part of it, and there's no doubt that a lot of the wines that he brought to dinners and a lot of the wines that he shared were actually the real deal. But then he kind of, I think he took things too far. Perhaps it's that ego thing that we see in the MICE acronym
Yes.
that we talked about earlier. I think that he starts to find all these treasures, and people are like, oh, where's he got this from? But people are being like chateau owners, like the owner of Chateau Yquem, fine wine people were backing him and saying this is the real deal. And at Christie's auction house, they sold his wines.
Huh.
They sold this bottle, Thomas Jefferson bottle, for a world-breaking amount to Malcolm Forbes.
How much was it?
It was something like it was over £100,000, and
Wow.
it took less than 2 minutes to sell it. It was
Oh my goodness.
it was crazy. At the time, this is fairly 30 years ago, so that's a lot of money at the time, and it goes on display in Fifth Avenue. Anyway, how does he manage to dupe people for so long? He's vehement that he's in the right. He's very he's not a nice man if you dare question his authority. And he had the backing of Christie's. They said the wines were
auction house,
authentic. They were authentic. And I think this is a big problem the wine industry has faced in a long time, is that, well, we haven't had the technology or the know-how to call out fraud. And there's sort of, when you're in the wine trade, you might know everyone likes everyone else to most of the extent. But there's sort of a chumminess within the wine industry.
Oh, yes.
And there's an element of trust that what you're giving me is correct. And I think that the wine industry has traded off trust for too long, and it has come to the realization that perhaps there needs to be more scrupulous.
I forget which U.S. president was, but trust and verify. I don't know if that was Reagan or who it was, but trust and then verify. But so he finally got found out. How was he discovered?
Did he finally get discovered though? Because
did he?
Oh. He did.
Did he
He
get-
didn't. But he, to the bitter end. A court ruled that he was. A court ruled eventually, like after 25 years, that he there was misdoing. He committed fraud, but he didn't turn up to the hearing, and he kept flatly denying it. He never went to prison. He never paid he never paid any money in reparations.
But he did go to jail or prison, rather. Yeah.
Yeah.
Okay.
No,
Huh.
It just. And this is the problem. There have not really been the rewards are high, and the risk has been quite low. No
Right.
one had been jailed for wine fraud until Rudy Kurniawan, and that's 2013 off the top of my head. So he commits this fraud. I think he loses face. And he falls out the wine scene. But yeah, he never kind of goes away. And that there was always a question, and there was always this question mark over him. He died recently, but there's always been this big question mark over the veracity of the wines, and will we ever truly know?
Right. And you mentioned his next door neighbor in the Hall of Rogues here, Rudy Kurniawan.
The Hall of Rogues, I like that.
Well,
use that.
Wine Rogues, yes, please do. He had a taste for the high life. He was another fraudster. He actually, if I'm quoting you correctly, ran up a credit card bill of $6 million at one point, and a large chunk of it was it Versace or some other high-end designer?
Hermes, yeah.
Hermes,
yeah.
oh yes,
Yeah, I mean,
yes.
Yeah, he racked up some great credit card bills on Amex, so he'd got a lot of points.
Wow, not good though if you can't use them from jail. But
no, not so much. But no, he was. Yeah, he's definitely. I call him. He's called the Great Gatsby. I call him the Great Gatsby of wine in my book. He's a bit like the Harley Rosenstock. He starts buying up wine. He gets himself a reputation. He ingratiates himself with the fine wine circles, the guys who go to the auction houses. He socializes in high-flying circles. People's not having. He goes to fine dining. He talks about wine. He seems quite knowledgeable. People start trusting him.
Huh.
So it's a good basis to start committing fraud from.
Absolutely. People love to be in his company, and he was quite generous in sharing both real and fake wines. But he got found out for a Bordeaux, I think it was a Ponsac wine. What happened? What was his mistake?
Yes. No, it was Laurent Ponceau. It was a 1929 Laurent Ponceau from Burgundy, yeah.
Okay.
So, yeah, he basically, that's when things were starting to unravel for him. I think there's a wine forum called Wine Berserkers.
Yes.
That I don't frequent. For personal, just, yeah.
Yeah.
I don't go on it. It's highfalutin wine circles for men. I haven't seen any women on there recently, or ever, in fact. So yeah, it's a circle for wine collectors, and there was starting to be people were starting to question him and going, how did he get his hands on this and such like. But then he put it up but lots of auction houses were still taking his wine, and they were still auctioning them off, and wine authenticators were authenticating people's cellars, and they were finding a lot of wines that they bought that were from Rudy Kurniawan buyer that had gone through auction houses' supposed selection process, and they turned out to be fraudulent. But yeah, it was it was some Laurent Ponceau. They hadn't started domain bottling yet in 1929, so it couldn't have existed. Oh. So Laurent Ponceau flows over to New York to go, what's going on? You can't sell this wine by auction because it doesn't exist. Wow. I think that in Rudy's words, excuse my French, but he says, sometimes shit happens. He was quoted as saying, and that's not really a good enough response, is it? And
no.
The FBI were on his case at this time, and finally they raided his house, his Californian house, early one morning, and
it was kind of like a grow house, but for wine. It was. You said it had like cheap heaters, and there was bottles on his treadmill and labels everywhere. It just sounded like a.
He was really caught red-handed. It was like a climate-controlled house. He was living there with his mother, and they were only in their bedrooms. That was the only place where there were heaters.
Oh wow!
There were bottles on the treadmill. They found recipes for 1945 Mouton Rothschild.
Recipes.
And
right.
recipes, stamps. wax. Yeah, they called it. I think the FBI, the FBI agent in charge called it sort of a modern day wine factory.
Wow, 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 wow. That's so funny. It usually is those small details that will trip up the criminals. I forgot to ask you or mention back at the Austrian antifreeze,
Yeah.
what actually broke that scandal? What was one vintner trying to do?
Yeah,
That was just so silly.
He put the diethylene. He put an inordinate quantity of diethylene glycol, and he tried to claim the tax back on it. And his account wondered why he had so much.
Yeah, it's
Smart.
usually accounting that will get you, either that or vintage. That's how
No
they
one
get all the
likes to account.
gangsters or the mob. So your stories raise an important question, as you yourself say in the book. What makes a wine truly authentic? You raising your hand for those who can't see her. Is there anything that comes to mind in terms of? I mean, I guess a wine is what it says it is. Could be one definition, but we talk about terroir and soil and climate. It's signature of the place and all this sort of thing. Are we fetishizing all of that?
Yes. Yes, we are. No, I think that this is a history of wine fraud, and what is deemed authentic in Roman times is not necessarily what we, or some of us, might consider authentic today. It really depends. Often it depends who you are, what country you live in, what period you're alive in. If you're a vintner, if you're a grape grower, you're a vintner, you're a wine consumer, or a wine merchant. That can alter what you think is an authentic wine. Your attitude towards making wine, whether I don't want to talk about natural wine, but it has to be said. Some people who follow the natural wine movement that grow the grapes organically, they think that only grapes should be in it and wild yeast should take hold, and that is all that should be in wine. That's what they consider natural wine. That's what they think is truly authentic. That was how people made wine in Roman times, and that's why they added herbs and lead, salts, and honey to the wine, because it tasted foul. We've come to a certain place in our life now, in our evolution of science, that we can make wine that tastes good and can be kept for a long time, so that we can expect a wine that tastes pleasurable. It's where it is what it is that on the label. Some people think that having sulfur dioxide in wine to help preserve it, to stop it from microbial infection, is wrong. Don't agree with them. People do add yeast. There are just it's so many shades of what you might think is authentic, and it really differs from person to person. I think we've all probably have our own opinion on that.
Yeah, it is a spectrum from the puritanical to the fraudster, and where do you find yourself fitting in the middle somewhere?
Yeah, and I think there's also another debate here, though, that if you are a fraudster and someone is drinking your bottle of 1940, so imagine you're drinking a bottle of Kurniawan's 1945 Mint Rothschild. Well, they said it was 2 parts Costa d'Estanel, 1 part Chateau Parma, and 1 part high-end Napa Cabernet. Now, do you know what? If most of us can't afford to drink Costa d'Estanel or Parma. I'm like, that sounds like a pretty tasty, delicious drink to me. It
does,
If you have a bottle of that and you don't know you have it, and you drink it and you think it is the real deal, are you a victim?
Right.
Possibly
Great question.
Not. Are you a victim if you don't know that you've been duped?
And you've had the sublime experience of your life, and you feel satisfied, and you talk about it with your friends. Yeah. Is there any crime? I mean, technically yes, but still.
Yeah. And
are
you
you
know
a
what?
victim?
If you drink, there's the 85-15 rule in wine, that if you say your wine is 85% Shiraz, it can have 15% something else in it.
Yes.
So if you think you're buying a bottle of Shiraz and you think it's 100% Shiraz, do you feel duped? Not really. But you probably don't know the laws anyway, so it doesn't make any difference to you. If you enjoyed the glass of wine, wine is meant to bring pleasure, and that's ultimately what my book is about. Wine is meant to bring pleasure. People have committed fraud in the past because wine wasn't pleasurable, but wine, most people can make a pleasurable wine today without doing anything dodgy.
Right.
Or, you drink a bottle of Bordeaux and it's a blend of varieties. Is it any less pure because it's Merlot, Cabernet, and Cabernet Franc? Yeah, there are so many things to think about. Laws have like sort of embedded that's okay, but is it?
Yeah. No, that's great. I love the bigger questions that arise from these stories. Fantastic.
Yeah. I've spent years thinking about these, and I think that you can keep on thinking about it, and you can change your mind every time that you discuss it.
And that's what makes it interesting.
Yes.
So it's okay to keep going back and forth.
Yes.
So what modern technology today is being used to deter fraud?
Lots of things are being used to deter fraud. I mean, as I said in the last sentence, I was talking about this. If you're drinking a $15-20 bottle of wine, you shouldn't you bought it in a wine store or a supermarket. There shouldn't really be any reason why there should be any fraud. There's really no reason to do it. But there are at the high end now where you can pay thousands of dollars for a bottle of high end wine. You do want to be assured that what is in that is what it says it is. So Chateau Margaux in Bordeaux on the left bank, they've taken it to the nth extreme, and they have like vintage specific bottle molds. So
Oh.
yeah.
The bottle changes every vintage?
There's a specific mold, yeah.
Huh.
You might
Wow,
have
that's
laser
costly.
Yeah. Well, it's not a $10 bottle of wine, is it?
True. Yes, they have the margins.
I have the margin. I don't. We've all if you've been at the chateau and you've seen the fancy things there, you're not worrying too much about their profit margin. And then there's things like laser etched bottles. There's QR codes, and there's in some bottles now you can get underneath the capsule you can get there's a seal that you can break, and if it's broken, and if people try to refill the bottle, like that specific bottle, they know that the seal has already been broken on that, because there's
it sends a message back. It's like a chip or something.
Yeah, it's like a chip, so you got that. But a lot of the wine authentication is actually done by wine authenticators, and you can hire wine authenticators these days, and they just have an encyclopedic knowledge of the fonts that we used and all the labelling and such on the bottles. That is not my domain.
Right.
There are
Sure.
people who can do that. People who authenticate. If you have a serious wine collection, then yeah. But if you're going into a wine store and you're buying a bottle of wine and you have a trusted wine merchant,
just relax. Yeah.
Just take it easy.
Life's too short. But I've heard they're even developing Bitcoin-like ledgers and NFTs and things like this to track the life cycle of a bottle from when it leaves the winery to its entire provenance, the way it travels through different owners or retailers, wholesalers, and so on. So I find that very fascinating where this is all going.
It's fascinating. But we don't know where it is going, and we don't know whether the technology that we're using now will be totally antiquated in 10 years' time.
Sure.
So it's all, it's, once again, it all depends, and there's no, like terroir, there is when you go to a French vineyard and you ask a question, they're like, ça dépend, and you're like, no, I really just want a straight answer.
Yeah, just tell me. All right, so you have a bottle of wine there. It's the real deal. What wine do you have with you, Rebecca?
I hope so. I got it direct from the winery. It was sent to me.
That's good.
Unless there was some tampering by the courier service en route. No, I have bought today a bottle of de Menuet.
Okay.
Clos de Boucs from Vouvray. So at the moment I'm tasting lots of Chenin Blanc for Venice. And it has a link to my favourite book that I also have brought along. Which is Wine and War.
Wine and War.
It's quite old now. I mean,
Don and Petty Kladstrup, right?
2001 it was published.
Yes, that's a fascinating book. Again, focuses on the stories of the people behind wine, especially during the war. Yeah.
Exactly. And so there's a little link here, because I love Chenin and I feel that it's underrated, and I cover the Loire Valley. That's one of my sort of areas. And there's a story in Wine and War about Gaston Huet. Now, during World War Two, he was a prisoner of war, and he was a German prisoner of war for 5 years. And then he comes back to his vineyard, and during all the horses had been requisitioned, and they'd had no fertilizer, no pesticides. The vineyards were the vineyards had been just devastated by disease and such like. And when he came back to Vouvray, he eventually got back to Vouvray. He lost a third of his body weight. He was a skeleton. He hadn't met his daughter, who was 5, 6 by the time he got back.
Wow.
And they rebuilt the vineyards and have become just one of the most. They're just the wines are total thoroughbreds, and they are an absolute icon for me, Vouvray and Chenin Blanc wines.
Oh wow! And so, what does that particular one taste like? You've got it in your glass there, so.
Yeah, it's a demi-sec. Now, demi-sec's also becoming around. Everyone wants dry wines these days, and everyone goes, "Ooh, it's sweet." It's only just sweet, and it's perfect. It's great for food pairing, and I just love it. And
what would you pair with it?
Well, everyone goes spicy food, but I think it's just delicious with. I think it's just delicious with creamy sauces. There's a lot of dishes that we have with like slight sweet elements, whether it's like a honeyed element. We add sugar to our things, and I just think it's just great for that. And it's just, you know what? It's also just delicious, just drinking on its own.
On its own, yeah.
And
for
what
pleasure.
what I love most about the Huet wines is that they have this this sweetness element, but they're not rich. They're like drinking. It's like drinking a cloud. A very delicate cloud.
I love
there's no weight to these wines. They're so delicate, and they just like float along.
So this is the drink of the angels or the gods. Yeah.
It's pure. It's just such incredibly pure, pristine fruit. And I think that it shows that. And do you know what? I think that when you're in a cool climate like the Loire Valley, despite climate change, you've got this amazing acidity, and you do need a little bit of residual sugar.
Sure.
To provide a balanced wine. And when a wine is balanced, you don't even think about sugar. And I think that, people should. There are a lot of people in Vouvray at the moment who are really obsessed with making dry wines because the market demands them, but they're often unbalanced.
Yes. Well, and the old adage, we talk dry and drink sweet. We get a lot of pleasure. Sweetness is the first taste we developed in life, and there's no shame. There's a lot of wine shaming going on about people who like an off-dry or sweet wine. They're just very pleasurable.
Yeah, it's pleasure. It's your glass. It's your mouth. Drink what you want. Exactly. It really is. Drink what you enjoy. It's nobody else's business.
Absolutely. Amen. All right. That puts us right into the lightning round. Rebecca?
Oh gosh, I'm getting this.
Don't worry. Oh no, don't worry. Describe the weirdest wine pairing you've ever had.
Yeah.
You don't know, or there've been so many strange ones in your life.
I literally cannot give you an answer to that. I have thought about it.
Did you ever pair any sort of fast food, junk food, anything like that, or
do you know what?
Or just you stick to meat and potatoes, do you?
You know what I do? I don't really care about food and wine pairing. It's a terrible thing to say. I know.
That's all right.
I think we focus on it too much, and
Fair enough.
And it just makes me stressed. I don't like to get stressed. I've already got enough stress in my life. To add food and wine pairing just makes another stress. And I think that we should all do what the Egyptians used to do and suggest wines for celebration, like wines for event, like it's wines for certain periods in your life. So wine for dancing, wines for your tax return.
Oh, what would you suggest for the tax return? I'll keep it in mind for next year.
Yeah, port. Something really like
something
20%
strong.
alcohol, which will just get you through it.
Yeah, exactly. Maybe a bittersweet finish, depending on your return, of course. But okay, fair enough. And you've already talked about your favorite wine book, so we'll skip right over that, Wine and War, which is great. We will put a link to that, and of course your own book. Is there been a useful wine gadget that you've come across?
You told me I couldn't have a caravan, and you told me I couldn't have a waiter's corkscrew. Can I have a glass?
Yes, you can have a glass.
Very useful.
You are allowed that. The next person can't, but you can. Do you have a favorite wine glass?
The one that's nearest to me.
Okay. Yeah, it looks like that is not. I'm trying to guess the brand there. Is that?
I have a lot of Riedel's. When you pass the Master
okay.
of Wine, they send you an inordinate amount of free wine glasses.
Oh, well,
Yeah.
one of the perks after you've spent $10,000 on getting your certification.
And the
A few
rest.
free glasses. Yes.
Cheers to that.
Cheers. Now, if you could share a bottle of wine with any person outside the wine world, living or dead, who would that be, and where would you take them or meet them?
Do you know what? I've always really wanted to meet Bill Bryson, the author.
Oh, really? The author, yes.
Yeah.
Sunburnt Country, and
Yeah.
then he wrote
It's a
about
small-
Britain too, didn't he?
Yeah, no, it's a
What was
small
it?
island.
Oh, that's it, yes.
Exactly.
Yeah.
I saw him. I saw him in King's Cross Station in London. He walked. He literally walked past me, and I was like, "I'm sure that's Bill Bryson." And I didn't know what to do. I was a bit starstruck. And then about 2 minutes later, I was like, "Just go and ask him if he wants to go for a pint with you." So I turned around and tried to find him, and he'd gone anyway.
He'd gone.
So yeah, Bill.
Oh, that's-
he writes a great story,
Yeah.
and I think that's just such a gift.
He is a wonderful writer. In fact, he's one of my inspirations when I write about wine, because he's all about the people. He's all about the storytelling. He's got a lovely sense of humor. And yet, you find out surprising things that you might mention at a dinner party or whatever. He really, I don't know, he's able to touch all the senses and enliven everything about his stories. I love his approach.
Absolutely.
Yeah. And which bottle of wine would you share with Bill? Or would it be a pint, I guess?
Maybe a good old British pint.
A pint,
it
of
could be a
course.
British pint.
Nothing
Otherwise,
stuffy.
Maybe it could be an English sparkling wine. Although
Okay,
he'd probably-
sure. Yeah, the next best thing to a pint. Excellent. Now, Rebecca, this has been fantastic. As we wrap up our conversation, is there anything we haven't covered that you'd like to share?
So the book's out in October in the
Good.
US and Canada, and
Okay.
it's available on Kindle. It will also be available. As a podcast. It's going to be available as an audiobook.
All right.
And
Are you reading it?
I am not reading it.
Okay.
It's been published by a company called Podium in the US, and
Okay.
they have. Do you remember? I don't know whether you ever watched. I didn't, but did you ever watch the series Lost?
Yeah, the first series, the first season. Hmm.
Well, there's a British actress who's in Lost who is voicing it. So,
Oh, very good.
do you know what? I've never done it. I did quite fancy it, but I simply don't have the time right now. So, she's a professional, so I'll let
Yeah,
her carry on.
absolutely.
I hope
It
she
is a skill.
pronounces all the French words properly.
Uh-huh.
Good luck to her.
Yes.
Yeah, and what else?
And where can we find this book online?
Online, the usual. Begins with A,
All the
ends in N.
bookstores.
Also called name of a famous rainforest in South America. Elgood bookstores. It's being published by University of California Press. If you've got any questions or you want to read more about it, you can go onto the University of California Press website or mine, which is RebeccaGibb.com. I didn't make it fancy, it's fairly simple.
Yeah. And we will put all those links in the show notes and in the live stream chat here. Rebecca, it's been wonderful. Don't log off, but I really appreciate your time. The stories are amazing. I loved your book. We just skipped along the surface. So people do have to get this book if they really want the juicy insider stories. But thank you. Thank you for spending your time with us and for writing this book.
It's a pleasure. Thank you.
All right. Cheers for now.
Okay, bye.
Okay, bye-bye.